According to many, many concerning reports, nightlife is apparently dying. Nightclubs have been closing all over Europe and North America. Alcohol sales have been dwindling for years, and even pizza consumption is down. But what's kind of annoying to me is that many just seem to be blaming this trend on young people. You've probably heard some of these before. They're the ones drinking less, they're on dating apps instead of dance floors, and many are in their grandma era. But I think just blaming young people for the death of nightlife leaves out one very important factor: nightlife itself. As a relatively young person myself, I don't think nightlife is dying because our preferences changed. I think nightlife is dying because nightlife changed, for the worse. Nightlife today feels more corporate, kind of monotonous, and at the very least, it's expensive.
The cover charge for a nightclub I checked out tonight was $35. That just feels wrong.
And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. Sociologists Paul Chatterton and Robert Hollins argue that urban nightlife is experiencing a form of McDonaldization, with big brands taking over large parts of downtown areas, leaving consumers with an increasingly standardized experience. This change is of course complicated, but for this video, I want to focus on one reason that I don't think gets nearly enough attention: urban planning.
1, 2, 1, 2, check, check, check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Let's get it poppin' in a minute like a balloon. South Americana with a girl from Peru, and I got a place in the hills. 20 kilometers on the highway, tripping off a case of the pills. Then I'ma double it 'cause I make the recipe.
Like any good journalist, I began this story with rigorous research, and that took me to the one place in Vancouver where I could properly study contemporary nightlife: Granville Street. Yes, Granville Street, home to the Roxy, Studio, Dublin Calling, the Rec Room, and Service Canada. For several weeks, I became a student of this fabled institution, attending evening classes, conducting experiments, and participating in hands-on research. And after enduring several tests and a messy graduation ceremony, I have 3 key findings to share. First off, nightlife today is indeed expensive. I tried to keep my expenses reasonable. Just one pre-drink cocktail, cover, coat check, a shot, a hot dog, and my taxi home. But the total still came to almost $80. Hi there. By the way, this part of the video is proof to the CRA that these were indeed business expenses. Second, nightlife today feels corporate. Over half the nightclubs here are chains or owned by large corporations. The Rec Room and Dublin Calling are cookie-cutter venues with multiple franchises across the country. And even places that seem independent are often run by large, multi-venue owning corporations. And my final and perhaps most disappointing finding is recycling. The DJs here just appear to be recycling club anthems from the 2010s. Seriously, here's the setlist from just 1 hour of clubbing, and where over half the songs were from over 10 years ago, with classics such as Party Rock Anthem, Party in the USA, and Beauty and the Beat, twice. But less than 30% of the songs were from the last 5 years. Have we not produced a club hit since the 2010s? Did Timbaland retire? If this is the state of nightlife, I don't think we should be surprised at all that people don't want to go clubbing anymore. But the thing is, nightlife didn't used to be like this. I want to take you to a time before the corporate clubs, before the outrageously priced cover and drinks. The 1980s were a turning point in North America and Europe. It was the Reagan and Thatcher era. Neoliberalism was neoliberalizing free trade around the world, and people hated disco for some reason.
Disco sucks! Disco!
And thanks to at least a couple of those things, manufacturing and other industries were leaving Europe and North America, which left behind empty, abandoned warehouses and factories right in the middle of cities. But those spaces didn't stay empty for long. Something began to fill the void. A new scene. A new sound.
In Detroit, as the automotive industry fell into decline, black teens listening to Kraftwerk, dreaming of Afrofuturism, and experimenting with synthesizers and drum machines started throwing parties in abandoned factories to play their new sound. That sound? Techno. In Chicago, as manufacturing jobs left the city, a nightclub called The Warehouse opened in a former shoe factory and became a popular hangout for gay, black, and Latino men. It soon became famous for a new style of post-disco electronic music that would eventually be named after the venue itself: house music. This story repeats itself again and again and again. Cheap spaces, talented artists, new instruments, social change, and sometimes a few new drugs mixed together to create whole new genres of music. These spaces were for much more than just hooking up with strangers. They were the incubators of new sounds and new cultural movements. In other words, clubs were exciting. So, what happened? How do we go from nightclubs that create new culture to the corporate nightclubs today that just recycle it? Well, I don't think this happened by accident. And to understand what happened, I want to take us somewhere else. Somewhere a bit more exotic. Toronto! Yeah. According to some reports, Toronto in the 1990s had the highest concentration of nightclubs in North America, thanks to this neighborhood just west of the downtown core. It was known as the Entertainment District, with over 80 clubs squeezed into less than a square kilometer. Its story is a familiar one. Once home to clothing factories, the area fell into decline in the 1980s, leaving behind empty warehouses. And that created space for nightclubs. Like the Twilight Zone, 23 Hawk, Boom Boom Room, Limelight, Catch 22, OZ, Circa, Turbo, System, Soundbar, Max, and many other clubs that helped turn Toronto's entertainment district into a center of nightlife in North America.
Enough nightclubs to keep you dancing till dawn. After dark, Toronto the Good becomes Toronto the Great.
But all this began to change in 1996. That year, the local government came out with a plan called the King's Regeneration Initiative. This plan was to attract more investment into the old industrial areas along King Street near downtown Toronto. These areas. And to do that, they changed the zoning bylaw of these areas to allow for other new uses, like condominiums. With this plan in place, a wave of new condo developments flooded into this neighborhood, and in the following years, the population in Toronto's entertainment district exploded from 750 people in 1996 to over 35,000 by 2019. So that cluster of towers over there is what Toronto's entertainment district looks like today. I mean, just wow. Now, at first, all this new activity initially brought more energy and even more nightclubs to this area. But as more and more people started living in the entertainment district and not just visiting it, that set the stage for some drama. There were now 35,000 residents in Toronto's entertainment district who also wanted to sleep at night. All right next to dozens and dozens of nightclubs that wanted to be a nightclub. So yeah, that became a problem. In 2004, a group of new residents here formed the King Spadina Residents Association, and their main goal? Reducing the hordes of drunken clubbers that overrun our streets and are a magnet for thugs, gangs, and drug dealers that threaten the safety of residents. They began to file noise complaints and lobbied politicians to crack down on nightlife with more regulations and taxes. The local government heard their complaints loud and clear and responded with perhaps their favorite tool. The following years saw an onslaught of red tape against nightlife. This included limits on venue size and nightclub density, insurance requirements, mandatory metal detectors, mandatory noise and crowd control plans, background checks for club owners, and of course, fine after fine after fine. In 2008 alone, over 2,600 fines were handed out in Toronto's entertainment district. But I would argue that the government's most effective tool to control its nightlife wasn't red tape. It was real estate. As condos flooded into the area, club landlords suddenly found themselves sitting on land worth tens of millions of dollars. Unless your nightclub was bringing in serious revenue, it became much more lucrative to sell it instead for redevelopment. And with each sale, another club disappeared until there were barely any left. As a local politician put it, the quickest way to get rid of a nightclub is to approve a condo that displaces the nightclub. In its heyday, there were over 80 clubs in Toronto's entertainment district. Today, there are less than 20. Toronto's story is not unusual, and it's not necessarily evil either. For the last several decades, cities all over North America have built more housing downtown to encourage more people to live inside the city, for a myriad of very well-intentioned reasons. But that is also where you often find a city's nightlife, and the two just don't mix together that easily. So, what do we do about this situation? Well, one city thought they had the answer. That takes us back to Granville Street in Vancouver. This story starts in the 1990s. Back then, the city had a thriving mix of nightclubs spread across the city's downtown, like Richards on Richards, the Town Pump, and Love Affair.
And people have lined up for 2 hours outside Love Affair nightclub in downtown Vancouver. Most have done this many times before.
But around this time, the city also began to encourage new developments around its downtown core. That turned once industrial areas near the city center into residential neighborhoods, and clubs like Love Affair into condominiums. Yeah, sound familiar? But this is where Vancouver's story takes a different turn. Instead of letting condos replace all the nightclubs, the local government thought, hey, maybe we could give these clubs a new official home. Enter Granville Street. At the time, Granville Street was in rough shape, and the city was looking for ways to breathe new life into it. Their solution? Turn it into a nightlife district. In 1997, the local government designated Granville Street as an entertainment district. They increased the number of liquor licenses here, banned condo developments, and encouraged other nightclubs to relocate here from other parts of the city. But establishing the Granville Entertainment District was just half the strategy. The other half was heavily restricting nightclubs in the rest of the city. That's right. As the city established the Granville Entertainment District, it also heavily restricted new nightclubs outside the area. Strict limits in the West End, restrictions across the Central Business District, and an outright ban on new clubs in Gastown, Downtown South, and the Downtown East Side. A ban that wasn't lifted until 2023. And for anywhere else in the city, opening a nightclub meant navigating distancing rules and a long, expensive approval process that could drag on for over a year and cost tens of thousands of dollars. First off, Vancouver's nightlife could now be contained to a single area, where it could be kept away from quiet residential neighborhoods and easily monitored by the police. At the same time, this was an economic strategy, one that could draw people and their cash from across Metro Vancouver to revive a struggling street. That is how we end up with the Granville Entertainment District today. It turns out this is where the city's nightclubs are, because until very recently, this was really the only area where nightclubs were encouraged. But as someone who lives here, I have to be honest, Granville Street today is not seen as a thriving example of nightlife. One review in a local paper described it as fun, sketchy, vibrant, uncool, and filthy. And a more honest review from Vice magazine called it the most horrible club zone in Vancouver. There is a lot of debate as to why that is the case. But in my opinion, I think a big reason is because of what's not on Granville Street. To understand what's going on, I want to take you back to this report by Paul Chatterton and Robert Hollins. They describe nightlife as a spectrum. On one hand, you have mainstream clubs who are trying to appeal to as many people as possible and maximize profits. On the other hand, you have alternative clubs. Their main motivation is to encourage experimentation, highlight artists, and create a welcoming space for a more niche community. Perhaps it's a queer-focused event, an experimental music genre, or a drag show interpretation of the musical Cats. But when you look around Granville Street, it is just overwhelmingly dominated by mainstream clubs. Now, part of the reason why is very simple: money.
rents for a nightclub space here are reportedly tens of thousands of dollars a month. At those prices, the only clubs that can survive here are the ones charging high and selling as many drinks as possible.
But there's another reason why you don't really find alternative clubs on Granville Street. This one's a little harder to explain, but very easy to feel. The vibes are off.
It's bro-y, way too focused on hooking up and spending money, and even if a weird alternative venue could afford the rent here, it just wouldn't fit in.
Vancouver isn't the only city that's run into this problem. Many other cities have tried a similar strategy: squeeze nightlife into one neat, controllable district. But over time, that strategy tends to squeeze out a much broader and frankly much more interesting spectrum of nightlife. Okay, let's recap. Here's why I think cities killed the nightlife.
For starters, cities developed housing around them, which dramatically increased rents and redevelopment pressures while creating much more scrutiny over nightclubs.
But on top of that, cities saw their nightlife as both a liability and an economic opportunity, something that needed to be tightly regulated, like cigarettes, but also something that could make a lot of money, like cigarettes.
That attitude reshaped nightlife into something that appeared safer, more controllable, and certainly more profitable. But in that process, it squeezed out the best kind of nightlife. Clubs and venues that weren't about making tons of money, but about creating a space for experimentation, culture, and community.
That kind of nightlife was probably never going to thrive in a government-sanctioned playpen for adults, or as part of someone's economic revitalization strategy. So it either went underground or it disappeared, leaving us with the boring and expensive mainstream clubs we have today. That's why I don't blame Gen Z or millennials on the death of nightlife. In my opinion, nightlife feels like it's dying today because our policies kind of suck the life out of it. And that depressing line was where I thought I'd end the video, at least initially, but the more I worked on this story, the more I began to land on a different theory. You see, I don't think nightlife is actually dying. I think it's hiding.
Here in Vancouver, I've come to learn of several nightlife venues operating at the margins, hiding in the basements of office buildings, or concealed within unassuming warehouses. And a lot of this isn't even happening in a typical nightclub setup. There are raves in SkyTrains,